Well, thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be on the panel with Julian and Brittany, who are the front lines of organizing on crucial issues. I think progressive vets are part of the bedrock of our ability to bring change. And I think the militarization of the Pacific is underappreciated by many people here in the States. And it's crucial to understand that, to understand where we are now. Um, I'm glad to be with a group of organizers. I'm mostly a researcher, but I've finally learned at age 70 that my research, without being useful to organizers, is sort of like a peculiar hobby. But I am learning that. And one other thing I've also learned is that it's not enough to just dissect the power structure, give an exquisite explanation of how much influence they have, because you're likely to demobilize people. They're like, oh God, that is a lot. I can't deal with that. So it has to be combined with some sense of hope. And hope comes from talking about our past victories, highlighting current organizing, and telling the stories of courageous people who've stood up against long odds and made a difference. So, being with people who are trying to change the world at a time when we're under siege is very inspiring to me. It keeps me going, maybe to write more than I should. But you know, one thing that's happened to me, because younger folks think I know stuff, they'll reach out to me about research questions. A lot of them are out of the ceasefire movement. More often than not, they're ahead of me on the issue that they're talking about. There's a guy named Bryce Green at University of Indiana. I met him on a Santita Jackson's radio show, which is very, the people actually get to talk to each other. And he sent me their research on Indiana University for input. It was 16 pages, incredibly detailed, more than I could have figured out because they were there. They were on the ground. And one thing they found was that the university had a relationship to a naval warfare center in southern Indiana that had 3,600 employees. Their professors were cycling through. That center worked on everything from missile defense to counterinsurgency to naval, expansion. So they've now got it's called Crane Naval, Keep Crane Off Campus campaign. I've also spoken to people in the Palestinian youth movement who have figured out how spare parts are getting to Israel to keep their planes running. And some of them are being sent by a FedEx out of the San Francisco airport. There's a researcher, Julian Cooper in Madison, who his first article that he published was about Oshkosh Truck, and they're selling military vehicles to the IDF, actually accelerating sales once the war in Gaza started. And there's many others. There's a researcher who's figuring out U.S. academics who get funding from the Israeli government. So what I've been trying to do is bring those researchers together with older generations who've been doing this for a while. And my experience is I learn more than they do, but I'm hoping that across issues we can get together once in a while, brainstorm about writing, swap sources. And since I really want it to be anybody who's working on any aspect of militarism, I'm hoping it'll be a small way to bring our parallel movements closer together. Um, so some of that connection is happening already, and is not my doing. But for example, there was a group called NARMIC, National Action Research on the Military Industrial Complex, which came out of the American Friends Service Committee in the Vietnam War period. It was a very crucial source of information. Well, some of the student researchers did a webinar with the founders of NARMIC about how they did their research, comparing ideas, of course. And likewise, my mentor, Michael Clare, who was head of research for Students of Democratic Society at Columbia, some of his old pamphlets have been scanned and linked to in articles by younger researchers. And finally, Little Sis, which is a power research organization, did a webinar with dissenters about how to research war profiteering connections at your university. And it was partly about enabling Israel, but it was also about military research, military connections, and boards of trustees. It was about getting militarism out of our university. So it's kind of a broader and longer term undertaking. So all of that is inspiring to me. And I think if we can create even a loose network, it'll advance the cause. And I've been thinking a lot about how do you integrate research into organizing and strategy. So it's not just a bunch of stats sitting on a piece of paper. And one of my inspirations has been working with the Shelley Barnes at the Poor People's Campaign, because not only is she an organizer, but she does research and writing. She sort of understands how to deal with people on the front lines who are going to be our leadership and see what they think is useful, kind of create a bigger picture of all of this. And along those lines, Listhea Harris, who's the co-chair of the campaign, has a book which is, I don't know if that's clear, but it's about the history of poor people's movements. And if you just Google Listhea Harris books, it'll pop up. But one of the things she talked about was kind of you need both. You need research and education. You need activism. And one thing she said in the book is, without a continual process of learning, reflecting, and growing intellectually, our organizing is reduced to mobilizing, an exercise in moving bodies without supporting existing leaders, developing new ones. Mobilizing people is important, but when it comes to our sole focus, we sacrifice long-term power for short-term action. And she goes on to quote MLK from his essay, Where Do We Go From Here? Education without social action is a one-sided value because it has no true power potential. Social action without education is a weak expression of pure energy. Our policies should have the strength of deep analysis beneath them to be able to challenge the clever sophistries of our opponents. And then she goes on to talk about different strategy or approaches to research and reform by organizers. So she looks at Miles Horton, who ran the Highlander School, which trained a lot of civil rights and labor activists, and Saul Alinsky, who is kind of some people's kind of go-to theorist on organizing. Alinsky felt that you needed victories of even small victories to keep people engaged, inspired, fighting a good fight. Miles Horton said it depends. He would rather work with groups that are looking for structural change than short-term reforms. And if he didn't want to like damp down the message to win those short reforms, if he sacrificed building a more radical, far-seeing movement. So I think, if you deal with Washington, which I've thankfully never moved to, but I'm in those circles, that problem of sacrificing long-term vision to short-term reforms is endemic. I work with some groups that work on nuclear arms control, and one of their demands is don't build a new intercontinental ballistic missile because you can save money if you extend the life of the old ones. In the meantime, they've been telling people correctly, these missiles are probably the most dangerous thing in the nuclear arsenal because in a crisis, the president has a few minutes to decide whether to launch them. And if there's a false alarm, they could have an accidental nuclear war. So whether they're old or new, it doesn't make a difference. And so why you would choose that is because they're guided by what can get through Congress. Aside from a few champions, Congress is bankrupt. That can't be our goal, nor should it be getting the Trump administration to listen to us. So it's really got to come from outside of Washington. And I know this group has done some of the best work about how to communicate, about how to organize. The fact that it's a global in scope is crucial because I think, when I was a student, we talked about solidarity with, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the people who've been subjected to the Pinochet regime in Chile. But there was kind of this notion of, we're in this great democratic society, and we have an obligation to help. Well, that was not the case then, and it's certainly not the case now. I would say we need as much solidarity from the rest of the world as they need from us. And there's people who have been through what we're witnessing now and worse, and we have to learn from how they survived that, how they approached that, and so forth. So I think for me, this 70-year-old white dude sitting in Manhattan, I need to do listening. I need to be a bit humble about my knowledge, my expertise, because there's different kinds of expertise. There's sort of stuff you get on the web, there's statistical analysis, but there's also how to organize, how to communicate, how to operate in different environments. So, in sort of the thought experiment, ideally, our meetings are not, like an academic expert telling folks how the world works. And again, the Poor People's Campaign kind of reminded me of that because Listhea Harris is yet another book. And before we heard any speakers, we sat in groups and swapped experiences, backgrounds, ideas. And there are actually very few speeches. There's more singing than talking, which is actually more fun than a DC webinar. And I think you need a certain amount of joy in the struggle because we don't know how long this is going to take. It helps sustain us, but also I think it makes it more likely people might join us. because the issues themselves are grim and bracing. But if you feel like fighting the good fight is sort of putting you in touch with humanity and just making you be able to cope with the world we're in, I think that's helpful. I know in my case, people are always saying, "Well, Bill, how can you deal with this depressing stuff all the time?" Well, the thing is, it's there. People are aware of it consciously or unconsciously, and to think you can just avoid it and just live with your community, your family, that's not possible anymore because uh, the effects are there whether you attend to them or not. So I feel actually I would be more depressed if I had given up. I was sitting home, playing video games, which I don't actually know how to do. So I don't think I have a lot more to say except, I think there's a lot of people sitting on the fence, at least in the US. It's coming at us fast and furious. They say they don't know what to do. And I always say to them, well, you're not going to figure it out by sitting back. You got to organize, you got to join groups. If you're in motion, together we'll figure it out. I did a webinar last night with the War Industry Resistors Network, and one of the questions was, had my co-author and I come up with a strategy in our book for change, of changing all these things. And I said, well, I don't think two white dudes at a think tank are going to be the ones who determine the strategy for a global movement. It's going to be a collective enterprise. People who are on the front lines, we have to take some guidance from them. And so I view myself kind of as trying to create support and give people arguments and information that they can use, and sometimes connect people maybe who I've met who aren't should be connected and working together, and encouraging some of the younger researchers that when I was a student, after we didn't win for a few years, a lot of people dropped out. But this is really should be a lifelong commitment, and I'm trying to communicate that to people. Also, for folks who can't get jobs at DC NGOs doing this stuff, no revolution has come from DC think tanks. It's people integrating this stuff into their everyday life. So, I'm encouraging some of the folks who have sort of lost that position to keep writing, to keep working at whatever level they're able, and also to understand that to overturn what we're dealing with, people are going to have to take greater risks than they have in the past because, elections are difficult. They're not following the court decisions. So people are going to have to, you know, break down the gears however they can. Civil disobedience, not participating in illegal orders, all that's in play. And, different people, I think, can afford to take different levels of risk, but we have to understand we're in a different moment. And there's plenty of examples of people all over the world who've done that. And so I think we need to learn from those. And I think um, the only last thing I'll say is Willie Baptiste, who is a mentor of Liz Theo Harris, has this saying, the struggle is the school. It's not about standing back and analyzing. It's about working together with people who have the experiences up front, people who are maybe looking at an overview and integrating the two when we figure out our strategy. So, those are my thoughts. And I thank you very much for having me. And I don't know, we may just go to the next speaker or not, but there'll be questions that I will receive and answer. So